The rain had been falling since morning, the kind of steady rainfall that made the earth smell like memories long buried. It soaked the red sand outside the little community church and tapped gently on the aluminum roofing like a quiet drummer calling people to gather. Even before the service started, the small auditorium was already heavy with a strange mixture of sorrow, hope, and desperation, feelings that only a prayer meeting could summon. Inside the hall, the fans turned sluggishly, pushing humid air in circles. The wooden chairs, old but wiped clean, were set in rows that led all the way to the modest pulpit. Behind the pulpit hung a faded banner with the words, "Heaven Still Answers." Nobody knew when the banner was printed. It had been hanging there long, before some of the current members even joined the church. But all eyes that evening were not on the banner. They were on Mama Esther. She was kneeling in the center aisle, head bowed so low that her forehead almost touched the cold tiles. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs at first, soft enough to be ignored, but gradually, the sound escaped her lips like a wounded bird. Her voice became louder, trembling as she whispered words she barely had the strength to say. "Most High, remember me. I am still here. I am still waiting. Don't let shame swallow me." Her fingers tightened around her scarf, and she rocked back and forth as if she was trying to console herself. Anyone watching her would know instantly this was not an ordinary prayer. This was a cry of someone carrying a burden that had refused to let go. The other women, mostly older mothers with wrappers tied firmly across their chests, watched her quietly. They had seen her pray like this before. They had seen her come every Thursday, kneel in the same spot, and cry the same tears. Some pitied her. Some admired her consistency. Some whispered to themselves that maybe someday the Creator would finally wipe her tears. But deep inside, a few wonder quietly, why has her prayer not been answered all these years? What exactly is holding her back? No one had an answer. Just then, the doors opened with a low creak, and Pastor John stepped inside. He was a man of calm presence, carrying a gentleness that always softened the room. But today, his eyes lingered longer on the congregation before settling on Mama Esther, still trembling in her prayer posture. He paused, not the kind of pause that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes from seeing something one has seen too many times and can no longer ignore. He walked toward the pulpit slowly, his shoes making soft clicking sounds on the tile floor. He placed his Bible on the podium but did not open it. Even without reading, he already knew the message today was not going to be the usual sermon. The members straightened, waiting for him to greet them with his calm. "May peace follow you." But he didn't say that. Instead, he looked around and said something nobody expected. "My children, tonight, I want to speak to you with a heavy heart." The room stilled. "I have watched many of you pray. I have watched you fast. I have watched you cry. I have watched you sow seeds. I have watched you shout until your voice cracked. But still, some of your prayers remain unanswered." People exchanged glances nervously. Pastor John continued, "The Most High is not deaf. Heaven is not ignoring you. But sometimes, listen carefully, sometimes we're the ones delaying our own answers." You could almost hear the air tighten. A soft gas escaped from the back. Someone muttered, "Eh? How?" Pastor John turned slowly toward Mama Esther, not to embarrass her, but because her story was the most familiar example of long-term unanswered prayer. He spoke gently. "My daughter, you have prayed for the same breakthrough for 7 years." Mama Esther's sobs stopped abruptly. She looked up in confusion, her eyes swollen and red. Pastor John continued, 7 years of tears, 7 years of fasting, 7 years of hoping. But I asked again, are you sure the delay is from heaven? A few people shifted in their seats. His words were piercing, uncomfortable, yet undeniably truthful. He looked at the members and said with a calm firmness, "Some of us shout for blessings, but our hearts are not ready for what we are asking for." Silence. The rain outside intensified slightly, as if the sky itself wanted to listen. Pastor John's voice softened even further. "Some of you pray for open doors while you are the ones closing them with your behavior, your thoughts, your bitterness, your disobedience, your fear." He exhaled and placed both hands gently on the pulpit. "I say this with love. Not every delay comes from the devil. Sometimes the delay comes from within. Mama Esther's breathing grew uneven. Even though he wasn't scolding her, she could feel his words wrapping around her heart, like a mirror reflecting the parts of herself she had long avoided. Pastor John looked deeply at her, then at everyone else. Let me ask a question, and please search your heart before answering. Are you truly waiting for heaven's answer, or are you just waiting for heaven to prove your own desire? Those words dropped like a heavy stone in the middle of the room. People blinked. Some inhaled sharply. Others looked at the floor. The question felt like it was aimed at each person individually, cutting through excuses and pretenses. Pastor John swallowed slowly. Tonight, before we pray, we must understand one truth. Heaven answers prayers, but heaven does not answer stubborn hearts. Mama Esther's eyes glistened with new tears, not of desperation, but of deep reflection. Painful reflection. For the first time in years, she wasn't crying because of her situation. She was crying because of a clarity she didn't know she needed. She whispered under her breath, "Creator, show me where I've gone wrong." Her voice cracked. Pastor John stepped down from the altar and walked closer to her. Every footstep sounded like a heartbeat echoing through the quiet hall. He stopped a few steps away and spoke calmly. "My daughter, let me ask you here, in front of people who care about you, if the Most High decides to answer you today, are you in a state to receive it?" The question hit her harder than thunder. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her tears rolled silently. Pastor John turned back to the congregation. Many people wait for blessings, but refuse the transformation that must come before the blessing. Someone whispered, that is true." A man at the back shook his head slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of the message. Pastor John continued, "Some of you have been asking for things you have not prepared yourselves for. Some of you pray for love, yet your hearts are sharp like broken glass. Some pray for wealth, yet cannot manage the little you have now. Some pray for change, but your character has refused to change." A woman near the window wiped her eyes quietly. Pastor John raised his hand and spoke in a tone filled with both love and firmness. "The Most High does not withhold blessings, but heaven will never deliver a blessing into hands that are not ready to carry it." The church was still. Even the children outside had paused their play, as if the wind had told them something spiritual was happening inside. Pastor John gently opened his Bible, but didn't read from it. Instead, he spoke like someone who had carried these words for too long. "My children, there are times when heaven is waiting for you to forgive, waiting for you to obey, waiting for you to change, waiting for you to let go, waiting for you to trust, waiting for you to move, waiting for you to release what is not good for you." He sighed deeply. Sometimes heaven is already answered, but you are not in the right place, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, or physically, to receive the answer. Many eyes lowered. The fan hummed softly. The rain whispered on the roof. Mama Esther closed her eyes slowly, her mind drifting back, far back, to memories she had not allowed herself to face. She remembered the day her husband left her unexpectedly, the shock, the humiliation, the anger, the betrayal, the way she swore she would never forgive him, the bitterness that wrapped itself around her chest like metal. She thought she had moved on. She thought time had healed her. But now, as Pastor John spoke, she felt something melt inside her, a barrier she had never acknowledged before. For the first time, she wondered, have I been praying for a breakthrough, while dragging chains I refuse to drop? Her chest tightened at the thought. Pastor John looked around and said, "Some of you pray to climb, but your heart is still carrying weights that cannot enter the next level." He placed a hand on his chest. "The Most High answers prayers, but sometimes He is waiting for you to release the things stopping you from receiving." Then he looked directly at the congregation and said the words that froze the air. "If your life contradicts your prayer will wait until your life catches up." A chill ran through the room. People held their breath as the truth settled deep inside. Mama Esther trembled as she whispered again, "Creator, help me, show me." Her voice was thin, like a thread holding on to hope. Pastor John nodded slowly, as if he heard her even though she spoke softly. "Tonight, before we lift any prayer, I will show you one of the biggest reasons people delay their own destiny. He paused. The rain softened as if nature itself leaned in to listen. But before we go deeper, let me ask you this question from the bottom of my heart. He scanned the room slowly, making eye contact with as many people as he could. Are you truly ready for the truth that can change your life? A ripple passed through the congregation. Some nodded gently. Some exhaled deeply. Some wiped tears they didn't expect to shed. Mama Esther dropped one hand to the floor for support. Her mind was spinning, not from fear, but from the realization that this night something was shifting, something she had not allowed to shift before. Pastor John stepped back and let the silence speak for a moment. Then he whispered, "Because the truth is the only thing that can unlock the prayer you've been crying over." The lights flickered briefly, as if heaven approved that message. Pastor John took one long breath and said quietly, "What I am about to reveal is not to shame you, it is to free you." Then he raised his head and declared, "Tonight, we begin with the first mistake, something so common that most Christians do not even know is delaying them." He opened his mouth to speak. The chapter ends right there, suspended in anticipation, leaving the audience leaning forward, eager for the revelation that is coming. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever prayed for something that didn't happen immediately? Yes or no? The rain had finally slowed, leaving the air outside the church cool and heavy with the smell of wet sand. Inside, however, the atmosphere felt even heavier, not from the weather, but from the weight of Pastor John's last words. It was as if every person in the room was being forced to look inward for the first time in a long time. Mama Esther remained on her knees, both hands resting weakly on her thighs. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't really seeing anything in front of her. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in reflection she had avoided for years. A trembling breath escaped her lips. It was a different kind of trembling, not the desperate cry she came with, but the trembling of truth pressing itself gently against a long-closed door. Pastor John walked slowly back to the pulpit. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted the room to breathe, to digest, to process. Sometimes silence teaches more than words. When he finally placed his hand on the edge of the podium, the members leaned forward almost instinctively. It was the kind of moment where the heart listens before the ears do. "My children," he began softly, "I want to start tonight by showing you something many people do not like to hear. Something uncomfortable, yet necessary. Something that delays more prayers than the enemy ever could." A soft murmur rose and fell among the members. Pastor John continued, "You think you are waiting for heaven, but in reality, heaven might be waiting for you to release something you have been carrying for too long." He paused, letting the words settle. "Tonight, I want to speak about unforgiveness." Silence swallowed the room. Unforgiveness. The word itself felt heavy, almost like a stone placed quietly in every heart. Some people lowered their heads instantly. Some shifted nervously in their seats. A few blinked away fresh tears. Pastor John spoke again, voice calm but firm. Many people pray for miracles, for change, for breakthrough, but they do not realize that bitterness in their heart blocks their blessings like a closed gate. Mama Esther blinked. Her heartbeat thudded loudly in her ears. Pastor John looked around the room. "You may say, but Pastor, the person hurt me. They betrayed me. They left me. They lied about me. They broke me. And you are right. They did. It was painful. Pain no one knows except you." His eyes softened. "But holding on to that pain is not punishing them. It is punishing you." A woman in the second row began wiping her eyes quietly. Pastor John continued, "My children, the Most High cannot pour new blessings into a heart that is still full of old wounds." He stepped away from the podium and walked slowly across the front of the church as he spoke. When you hold on to unforgiveness, you close your heart. And when your heart is closed, even heaven cannot enter. Some of you are praying with your mouth, but your heart is refusing the answer. He turned toward Mama Esther. "My daughter, I want to tell your story today, not to embarrass you, but because your testimony will set many people free." Mama Esther's eyes widened. She swallowed hard. Pastor John continued gently. "When you came to this church 7 years ago, you were a different woman. Your smile, your strength, your hope, you were full of light. but that light dimmed after your marriage collapsed. A few people looked at Mama Esther with sympathy. Not many knew the full story. Pastor John took a deep breath. When your husband left you suddenly, without explanation, without apology, without closure, something inside you broke. And instead of healing, you held on to the pain. Mama Esther squeezed her eyes shut. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Pastor John lowered his voice. I remember the day you told me, Pastor, I will never forgive that man. Never. The Creator himself will judge him. She covered her face with both hands. The entire church froze. Pastor John's voice was soft. My daughter, you said those words with a wounded heart. But those same words became a chain. You locked your own breakthrough, without knowing it. He turned to the congregation. Listen to me, all of you. Pain is real. Betrayal is real. Heartbreak is real. But when you hold on to unforgiveness, you are telling the Most High, I want justice more than I want healing. The room remained silent. Pastor John spoke again, this time slower. Some of you are praying for elevation, but you still think about how to prove your enemies wrong. Some are praying for peace, but your heart still burns with resentment. Some want new relationships, but you have refused to release the ghost of the old one. A mother in the back began sobbing quietly. Pastor John walked back toward the pulpit and rested his hand on it. I want to show you something through a story. Sit quietly and listen. Everyone leaned in. There was once a woman with a bowl. The bowl was cracked. The crack was caused by a betrayal she had suffered. She carried the bowl everywhere, crying over how broken it was. The Creator wanted to fill her bowl with blessings, but every time he tried, the blessings leaked to the crack of her pain. He paused. One day, the Creator said to her, Give me the bowl. Let me repair it. But the woman held it tighter and said, No, this crack reminds me of what they did to me. I will never release it. So she kept the bowl, and the blessings never stayed. He let the lesson settle. Many of you here are that woman. You are holding on to the pain because you think releasing it means the person wins. But hear me clearly. It is not about them. It is about you. Your heart cannot hold blessings if it is still leaking bitterness. Mama Esther's shoulders began shaking violently, not from shame, but from the deep ache she had buried for so long. Pastor John continued gently. The moment she finally gave her bowl to the Creator, it was repaired. The blessing stayed. Her life changed. His eyes softened. My daughter, do you know why your prayer for restoration has not been answered for 7 years? Because you have been asking for a new beginning while holding on to an old wound. Mama Esther let out a shaky sob. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I didn't know. Pastor John knelt beside her gently, his voice barely above a whisper. You did not know, but now you do. He touched her shoulder lightly. The Most High has not forgotten you. Heaven heard every tear. But the blessing has been waiting for the day you release the bitterness. A quiet sniffle echoed from somewhere in the congregation. Pastor John stood again. My children, I want to tell you a truth that many people avoid. Forgiveness is not a favor you do for the person who hurt you. It is a gift you give yourself. He continued, because unforgiveness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Pastor John walked slowly back to the pulpit. Do you know what unforgiveness does? It closes the heart, and prayer flows from the heart. So when your heart is blocked, your prayer cannot ascend. He raised his head gently. Some of you have prayed for years, but the Most High is waiting for you to lay down the bitterness before he pours a blessing. His eyes filled with compassion. Do you know why? Because your blessing should meet you healed, not hurting. A long moment passed. Then Pastor John said, Let me show you how unforgiveness delays destiny. He opened a small notebook near the Bible and spoke. I once knew a man who prayed for financial breakthrough for 5 years. Good job opportunities came, but each one slipped through his fingers. He thought it was the devil. He paused. But when we spoke, I discovered he had a deep hatred for someone who cheated him in the past. He carried that hatred everywhere. It was always at the front of his mind. Pastor John leaned forward. But here is the truth. Your mind cannot carry hatred and wisdom at the same time. Your heart cannot carry bitterness and blessings together. He sighed. The moment he forgave, I say this with my whole chest, the very next month, his breakthrough came. A few people clapped weakly, unable to hold back their amazement. Pastor John raised a hand. I am not telling you that forgiveness is easy. I am telling you it is necessary. He turned toward Mama Esther again. My daughter, tonight I want you to make peace, not because your husband deserves it, but because your destiny deserves freedom. Her tears fell like rain. He continued, forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means releasing the power the pain has over you. The church nodded slowly. Pastor John lifted his head. Some of you think you have forgiven because the anger is not loud anymore, but quiet resentment is still resentment. He looked at them deeply. Some of you say you have forgiven, but you still talk about the pain every time the person's name is mentioned. He continued, some of you say you have forgiven, but your heart still tightens when you remember what they did. He raised his hand gently. Forgiveness is not when you forget. Forgiveness is when a memory no longer controls your heart. A woman near the aisle whispered, Creator, help me. Pastor John smiled gently. Yes, it takes divine strength to forgive. You don't do it alone. Heaven helps you, but you must be willing. He paused and looked at the congregation with sincere eyes. Do you know the saddest part? Some of you are holding bitterness against people who have moved on with their lives. They sleep in peace while you carry a weight that is delaying your own blessing. The room fell silent again. Pastor John continued, some of you are angry with family members, some with ex-partners, some with bosses, some with old friends, some with dead people who are no longer alive, but you still carry the wound as if it happened yesterday. He shook his head slowly. And your prayers, your blessings, your breakthroughs, all of them are waiting for the moment you free your heart. He sighed deeply. The Most High cannot feel a clenched fist. He opened his palm slowly, but he can feel an open one. He let the message sink in. Mama Esther lifted her head slowly. For the first time in years, her tears were soft, almost cleansing. She whispered, I want to let go. I want peace. I want freedom. Pastor John smiled gently. That is the beginning. He looked at the church. My children, tonight we start the journey to releasing the things that delay our prayers. He took a deep breath. Tonight we begin with forgiving. The church breathed together, like a single body taking in fresh air. And then, Pastor John asked a question that touched every heart in the room. Who are you still holding in your heart? Tell me in the comments. Is there someone you need to forgive, even if it's hard? Yes or no? The gentle rumble of thunder echoed from a distance as the rain finally thinned to a mist outside the church. A soft breeze slipped through the slightly open windows, making the curtains sway like quiet worshipers. But inside the church, the air remained thick, full of the emotional weight of everything Pastor John had revealed so far. Mama Esther stayed seated on the floor, her hands folded neatly on her lap now. Her tears had slowed, replaced by a strange stillness, the kind that comes after a soul finally admits something has been avoiding for too long. Other members sat quietly, lost in their own thoughts. Some stared at the ground. Some looked at Pastor John with heavy eyes. Some had their hands on their chests, as if trying to calm an invisible ache. Forgiveness, a word so soft, yet heavy enough to bend even the strongest heart. Pastor John stepped away from the pulpit again. He walked slowly across the hall, his steps measured, his face calm. He was not preaching tonight. He was guiding, and that made every word feel more urgent, more personal, more necessary. After a long silence, he finally spoke again. My children, forgiveness is one of the biggest delays to prayer. But tonight, I want to show you another truth that is even more painful. A few people inhaled sharply, bracing themselves. Pastor John's eyes softened. Sometimes, your prayer is not being delayed because of who hurt you, but because of the life you are living. Mama Esther's eyebrows furrowed. Others looked up immediately. Pastor John continued. Some people pray for blessings but live in a way that repels the blessings. Some pray for peace but live in chaos. Some pray for elevation, but their habits pull them down. Some pray for open doors, but their character shuts those doors before they even reach them. He walked to the middle of the church, facing everyone directly. You cannot pray like an eagle, but live like a chicken. You cannot ask for spiritual blessings while living in emotional darkness. You cannot cry for change while refusing to change anything about yourself. The words sliced through the room gently but deeply. Pastor John took a deep breath. Do you know the most painful truth? Many people delay their own prayers because the life they live contradicts the prayer they pray. A heavy silence spread across the hall. He continued softly, My children, the Most High does not bless who you pretend to be in public. He blesses who you are in private. A woman in the third row lowered her eyes sharply, her hands trembling. Pastor John noticed, but didn't single her out. Instead, he told a story. Let me tell you about a woman I once knew. She was a powerful prayer warrior. Her voice could shake the room. When she prayed, people felt goosebumps. She was dedicated, consistent, always present at every vigil. He paused. But her private life was a different story. The congregation leaned forward. In the church, she lifted holy hands. But at home, those same hands carried resentment. On Sunday, her mouth sang worship. But the rest of the week, her words were full of gossip, bitterness, and harshness. He shook his head. She prayed for a good marriage, yet she treated her husband like an enemy. She prayed for children, yet she insulted other mothers behind closed doors. She prayed for healing, yet she poisoned her heart with anger daily. He raised his head slowly. You cannot plant thorns in your heart all week and expect roses to grow during prayer. Soft murmurs rippled through the congregation. Pastor John continued. Her prayers were powerful, but her lifestyle made them powerless. Not because heaven refused to answer her, but because she refused to look at herself. He paused again. And so her prayers kept hanging in the air. A man near the back swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead, even though the room was cool. Pastor John took a few steps toward the side of the room. Listen to me, my children. There's a kind of prayer that rises quickly to heaven, but there's also a kind that never leaves your lips because your life itself is contradicting what you are asking for. His voice softened even more. You cannot ask heaven for peace while you cause chaos everywhere you go. A young woman looked down, pressing her fingers tightly together. You cannot ask for financial breakthrough while your hands misuse the small money you already have. A man shifted uncomfortably. You cannot pray for love while carrying pride, disrespect, or emotional sharpness. The older women nodded quietly. You cannot pray for relationships restored while you build walls instead of bridges. He paused again, letting the truth settle. Sometimes the problem is not your prayer. The problem is the person praying it. The weight of those words pressed gently but deeply into every heart in the room. Pastor John continued, Let me show you something through a story. He leaned against a chair lightly, like a father beginning a moral lesson. There was a young man who prayed every day for blessings. He asked the Creator to open doors for him, to promote him, to elevate him. He prayed sincerely, loudly, consistently. He stopped. But that same young man lived a careless life. He was lazy. He arrived late everywhere. He gave excuses instead of effort. He spoke rudely. He broke promises. He wasted opportunities. He buried his talents under procrastination. He shook his head. Then one day he asked, Why is heaven not answering me? Pastor John sighed. It wasn't that heaven refused. It was that his character was not prepared for what he was asking for. He lifted his hands slowly. Blessings do not survive in undisciplined hands. A few people gasped quietly. Some nodded with trembling lips. Pastor John continued, My children, the Most High answers prayers, but he will never give you something that your current lifestyle will destroy. Silence again. He walked toward Mama Esther gently. My daughter, your prayer was not only delayed because of unforgiveness. It was also delayed because of the life you lived after your pain. She looked up slowly, eyes swollen, heart open. Pastor John knelt slightly to her level. Do you remember the day after your husband left? The day you said, I will never trust anyone again? That day, a wall began forming around your heart. Her lips trembled. Then months later, you said, "I don't care about anyone. I just want to survive." Another layer formed. He continued softly. Then you withdrew from people. You stopped smiling. You stopped helping. You became cold, quiet, distant, bitter. You moved through life with heaviness. You prayed with your mouth, but lived with fear. She covered her face with both hands. Pastor John spoke gently. Your prayer was for restoration, but your lifestyle was survival, and survival mode cannot receive the blessings meant for restore hearts. Her sobs grew deeper. The church grew even more still. Pastor John stood and faced everyone again. Your lifestyle can either prepare you for your blessing or push your blessing away. Your habits can either attract your answered prayer or delay it longer. He looked around. Some of you pray for open doors, but your attitude closes them at the entrance. Some pray for opportunities, but when small opportunities come, you waste them. Some pray for love, but your heart still carries thorns from the past. Some pray for promotion, but your work ethic is weak. His voice trembled slightly, not with anger, but with compassion. My children, listen carefully. Prayer is powerful, but your lifestyle must match your prayer. A young man whispered, "Creator, help me." Pastor John nodded. Yes, because change is not magic. It is decision. It is action. It is transformation. He continued, the Most High can bless you, but can you maintain the blessing? Can your character carry it? Can your heart sustain it? He raised his head. Some people are crying for blessings they are not ready for. The word spread across the room like gentle thunder. Some of you pray for a good partner, yet your heart is still sharp with unhealed wounds. Some pray for financial elevation, yet you waste money as soon as it comes. Some pray for peace, yet you do not control your actions. He sighed deeply. Lifestyle is louder than prayer. The room reacted like the truth had struck everyone at once. Pastor John walked to the pulpit again. Let me end this chapter with a simple truth. He placed his hand on his chest. You cannot pray your way out of what you behave your way into. The church froze. Then a ripple of emotional realization spread. A few people sobbed quietly. Mama Esther placed a hand gently over her heart, whispering, "I understand now. I understand." Pastor John smiled gently at her. Good, because heaven has been waiting for you to understand. He turned back to the church, and heaven is waiting for you too. He took a deep breath and said, your prayer will begin to work the moment your lifestyle stops fighting it. The rain had completely stopped by the time Pastor John took a long breath and stepped away from the pulpit once again. The evening sky outside deepened into a calm gray blue, that quiet hour between day and night when the earth feels like it is holding its breath. But what was happening inside the church felt even heavier, even more sacred. The members were no longer just attendees. They were participants in their own awakening. Mama Esther sat on the floor with her back against one of the wooden chairs now. Her eyes were red, but a strange peace rested on her face. For the first time in a long while, she had stopped crying long enough to feel something else. Clarity. Something inside her was opening, like a long rusted lock finally loosening after years of stubborn resistance. Others in the congregation were also lost in their reflections. A few had their heads bowed. Some sat with hands clasped tightly. Others stared at Pastor John, as if they had never really seen him until tonight. Pastor John let the silence stretch a little longer. He wanted every heart to absorb the truth from the earlier chapters. He wanted the weight of unforgiveness and lifestyle contradictions to settle deeply, so that what he was about to reveal next would pierce through any remaining resistance. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but carried unmistakable authority. My children, there is another truth we must face tonight. It is not easy to hear, but it is necessary if you want your prayers to produce results. He paused. This one is even more common than unforgiveness, more common than a contradictory lifestyle. And yet, many Christians do not even realize they are guilty of it. Everyone looked up slowly. Pastor John placed one hand on the pulpit. It is a mistake of praying without obedience. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The word obedience had a way of touching nerves people didn't know they had. Pastor John continued, Many of you pray beautifully. You pray loudly. You pray consistently. You pray sincerely. But when the Most High gives you an instruction, you ignore it. The room grew still. You ask for direction, but when direction comes, you choose your own path. You pray for guidance, yet when guidance is revealed, you close your heart. You pray for change, but refuse to follow the steps that lead to change. He stepped down from the pulpit. A prayer without obedience is like a car without fuel. It looks good. It sounds good, but it will not move. A soft gasp rose from the back. Pastor John spoke again. Let me show you through a story. Listen carefully. He walked slowly to the middle aisle. There was a young man named Daniel. He prayed every day for financial breakthrough. He prayed with tears. He prayed with fasting. He prayed with passion. His voice shook the walls of a small room. He paused, and heaven heard him. Members leaned slightly forward. One day, Daniel heard a quiet instruction in his spirit. Start small. Sell what you know. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Pastor John lifted his hand, but Daniel ignored it. He said, "This cannot be the Creator speaking. I want something big, something miraculous, something dramatic." Some people smiled in painful recognition. So Daniel continued his prayer. Weeks passed. Months passed. Another instruction came. Learn a skill. Grow in knowledge. Prepare yourself. Pastor John shook his head slowly. But Daniel refused again. He said, "I don't want to learn anything. I want a breakthrough that will shock my enemies." Several people lowered their heads. Pastor John continued. Then one day, he received a third instruction through someone he respected. Be responsible with the little money you have. Manage it well. Again, Daniel rejected it. He said, "What I have is too small to manage. When the Creator blesses me properly, then I will manage well." The entire congregation sighed together. Everyone understood. Pastor John took a long breath. My children, Daniel was not lacking blessings. He was lacking obedience. And because he ignored the small instructions, he missed a big breakthrough. Mama Esther let out a soft exhale, understanding the message deeply. Pastor John continued. Do you know what eventually happened to Daniel? After many years of praying, he grew tired. He said, "Heaven has not answered me." But the truth was, heaven answered long ago. He just refused to obey. A young man wiped tears from his cheek quietly. Pastor John looked around the room slowly. Some of you have been praying for things that require obedience, not more prayer. His voice grew softer. You want love, but heaven told you to be patient, and you refused. You want peace, but heaven told you to walk away from toxic habits, and you ignored it. You want elevation, but heaven told you to humble yourself, and pride said no. His tone deepened with compassion. You want success, but heaven gave you small work to start with, and you said it's too small. You want increase, but heaven told you to learn discipline, and you resisted. He stepped closer to the congregation. You pray for miracles, but avoid the instructions that activate them. A few people began sobbing quietly. Pastor John continued. Some of you think obedience is only about big things, like quitting a bad habit or ending a wrong relationship. But the Most High often begins with small instructions. He held up one finger. Wake up earlier. A second finger. Save a little money. Another finger. Speak gently. Another. Help someone quietly. Another. Apologize first. He paused, letting each one settle like a seed. These small instructions are not random. They are stepping stones to the blessing you're praying for. He walked toward the windows and turned back. Let me tell you another story. Everyone leaned in. There was a woman named Grace. She prayed every day for the healing of her daughter. She prayed with all her strength. But one night, she felt a gentle instruction in her heart. Forgive your sister. He paused. That instruction had nothing to do with her daughter, at least in her mind, so she ignored it. She said the problem was not forgiveness. The problem was her daughter. He sighed. But heaven saw something she didn't. The healing she wanted was tied to forgiveness she resisted. The longer she held the grudge, the longer the healing delayed. He continued gently. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. And every time she prayed, she felt the same instruction again. Forgive. But she refused. Members inhaled deeply. Then one day, her daughter asked her, "Mummy, why do you cry every day?" And she broke down. That night, she finally obeyed. She forgave. Pastor John's voice softened dramatically, and within a week, the child started healing. Soft gasps echoed across the room. Pastor John lifted both hands gently. Obedience is the key many Christians are missing. He walked back to the front of the church. You cannot ask the Most High for a blessing and refuse the path that leads to it. You cannot beg for an open door and refuse to walk when it opens. You cannot pray for guidance and then argue with every instruction. He paused. My children, prayer is asking, but obedience is receiving. The words sank deep. Pastor John continued. Some of you think the Most High is slow, but he is waiting for your obedience, waiting for you to take responsibility, waiting for you to do your part. He walked toward Mama Esther again. My daughter, she lifted her head. Your blessing did not delay only because of unforgiveness. It did not delay only because of the pain you carried. Part of the delay came when heaven gave you instructions, but pain made you ignore them. She covered her mouth with her hand. Pastor John continued gently. The day you were told to join the women's fellowship, you refused. You said you didn't want people around you. She nodded slowly. The day you were encouraged to attend the community training, you said there was no point. Her tears fell. The day a neighbor told you a small opportunity to start something, you waved them off. She sobbed softly. Pastor John said, these were not random events. They were seeds. They were doors. They were instructions. But your heart, heavy with pain, could not hear them. He continued. You prayed for restoration. You prayed for a new beginning. You prayed for hope. But each time the Most High sent an instruction, you said, not now. The room was silent. Mama Esther pressed her hands to the floor, crying, not from shame, but from the sudden realization that she may have unknowingly walked away from opportunities meant to lift her. Pastor John placed a hand over his heart. Obedience does not always make sense. Sometimes it is uncomfortable. Sometimes it goes against logic. Sometimes it feels too simple. But that is how heaven works. He took a long breath. Prayers open the door, but obedience walks through it. He looked around at every face. So I ask you tonight, what instructions have you been resisting? What simple steps have you ignored? What small beginnings have you despised? What voice have you pushed aside because it didn't fit your plan? Silence. Then his voice softened even more. My children, the blessing you pray for is not far. It is on the other side of obedience. Mama Esther placed a hand on her chest. I understand. I see it now. I was praying, but I was not obeying. Pastor John nodded. And now that you see it, your breakthrough could begin. The room felt warm, full of an invisible presence of healing and clarity. Night had finally settled over the church environment. The rain was gone, but the ground outside still glistened with puddles reflecting the dim streetlights. The world had quieted into that deep, soft silence only night could bring. Yet inside the church, something different was happening. Something warm, alive, stirring, almost like the quiet beginning of a rebirth. The worshipers remained seated, exhausted yet renewed, their hearts raw from the truths Pastor John had unleashed. It felt less like a sermon and more like surgery. Painful, necessary, healing. Many had cried. Many had reflected. Many had acknowledged their own faults for the first time in years. Mama Esther sat quietly near the front now, her back finally resting on a chair. She wasn't trembling anymore. A gentle peace had begun settling around her like a fragile cloth. Her eyes were swollen, but her breathing was steady. Something inside her was softening, reshaping, mending. Pastor John stood near the pulpit again, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes traveled across the faces of his flock, faces that looked tired but freed, wounded but awakening, hesitant but willing. He knew they were ready for the next truth. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and full of fatherly tenderness. My children, we have spoken about forgiveness. We have spoken about lifestyle. We have spoken about obedience. But tonight, I must tell you another truth, one that many Christians overlook. He paused. Sometimes your prayers are not delayed because you lack faith, but because you are not prepared. The words hung in the air like incense. You are praying, but you are not preparing. You are asking, but you are not ready to receive. You are hoping, but you are not equipping yourself for the blessing. Several people shifted in their seats, their hearts already stirring. Pastor John continued, prayer is powerful, but prayer without preparation is like planting a seed on bare concrete. The seed is good. The intention is good. The desire is good. But the ground is not ready. He looked at the congregation gently. And some of you are not ready. A young woman in the back clasped her hands tightly, as if trying to squeeze courage into herself. Pastor John stepped down from the pulpit again. Let me show you this through a story. He walked slowly toward the center aisle. There was once a young woman named Anita. She prayed every day for marriage. She prayed with passion, with tears, with fasting. She told the Creator, give me a man who will love me, a man who will cherish me, a man who will understand me. He raised his hand, and heaven heard. Members leaned forward, sensing the weight of what was coming. But Anita had never healed from her past. She had wounds from childhood, rejection, abandonment, fear. She had walls around her heart so high that even love could not climb in. She pushed people away without realizing it. She judged intentions without listening. She reacted before understanding. He paused. And every time a good man approached her, she ruined it. Not because she was wicked, but because she was unprepared for the blessing she prayed for. A painful silence followed. She prayed for a husband, but she had not prepared to become a wife. He continued softly, you can be praying for something good, yet be unprepared for the responsibilities that good thing requires. He let the truth settle. After years of disappointment, Anita cried, Creator, why have you forgotten me? But heaven had not forgotten. Heaven was waiting for her to heal, grow, mature, prepare, so she wouldn't destroy the blessing once arrived. A woman in the corner began sobbing quietly. Another wiped her eyes. Pastor John walked slowly, letting the story sink into every heart. My children, many blessings require preparation, not because heaven is withholding them, but because blessings, when mishandled, become burdens. He paused. You are praying for a car, but are you prepared for fuel, maintenance, responsibility? You are praying for a bigger house, but are you prepared for the discipline to manage it? You are praying for wealth, but are you prepared to control your spending, your habits, your discipline? He lifted a finger gently. You cannot pray for increase while living like someone who is not ready for it. A young man lowered his head in shame. Pastor John continued, Let me give you another example. He turned slightly, scanning the room. There was a man who prayed for years to become a leader in his workplace. He wanted recognition. He wanted promotion. He wanted authority. But the Most High kept him waiting. Members listened intently. One day he asked me, Pastor, why doesn't heaven answer my prayer for promotion? And I asked him, Are you preparing for leadership? He paused. He was shocked. He said, But I pray every day. Pastor John nodded slowly. And I told him, prayer may open the door, but preparation keeps the door open. The congregation reacted with slow nods. Leadership requires patience, emotional maturity, communication, self-control, discipline. But this man was always angry, easily irritated, quick to speak, slow to listen. He wanted promotion, but his character was still in the level of a follower. Pastor John shrugged gently. How could heaven give him a position his discipline could not carry? He sighed. He prayed, but did not prepare, so the blessing waited. Silence filled the church. Pastor John returned to the front. My children, when you pray for rain, you must also bring a bucket. Eyes widened. Hearts trembled. Some of you are praying for blessings, but you are not preparing containers to hold them. Some of you want opportunities, but you are not developing the skills needed. Some want elevation, but you are not building the character that sustains it. He took a slow breath. You want success, but you spend your time carelessly. You want influence, but you avoid responsibility. You want breakthrough, but you refuse to discipline yourself. You want increase, but you do not manage the little you have. He shook his head softly. Many Christians love prayer but hate preparation. He raised his hand slightly. Preparation is proof of expectation. Members murmured softly in agreement. If you truly believe heaven will answer your prayer, you'll begin preparing for the answer. He paused, looking around at every face. My children, many of you want blessings that require new versions of you, but you're still living in old patterns, old fears, old habits, old attitudes. His tone softened. You pray like someone who wants change, but live like someone who is comfortable in the same place. A man wiped his eyes. Pastor John walked toward Mama Esther slowly. My daughter, she looked up at him with trembling lips. You prayed for restoration. You prayed for new beginnings. But for years, you did not prepare for the life you were asking for. She swallowed hard. When heaven brought opportunity for you to learn new skills, you said no. When heaven sent women to support you, you hid. When heaven nudged you to take small steps, you refused. Not because you were stubborn, but because you were broken. She began crying softly again. Pastor John spoke gently. This is not blame. It is understanding. You prayed for a harvest, but you did not plant seeds. You prayed for doors, but you did not move your feet. You prayed for healing, but you did not heal inside. He placed a hand over his heart. My daughter, for 7 years, you cried for a blessing you were not emotionally prepared to receive. She covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by the truth. Pastor John continued, but look at you now. You are opening. You are softening. You are healing. You are preparing, even if you don't realize it yet. Her tears became softer. He stood and addressed the entire church again. My children, listen to me carefully. He raised his voice slightly, not in anger, but in authority. Blessings come to prepared hearts. He continued, when you prepare, you show heaven that you are ready. When you prepare, you attract what you pray for. When you prepare, you align yourself with your destiny. He let the silence speak for a moment. Preparation may look like healing. It may look like discipline. It may look like humility. It may look like learning. It may look like letting go. It may look like starting small. He lowered his tone. But whatever form it takes, preparation is never wasted. The air in the church felt heavy with thought, conviction, and awakening. Pastor John stepped behind the pulpit again and touched it gently. So tonight, I ask you with all sincerity. His voice dropped to a whisper. Are you prepared for what you are praying for? A tremor ran through the room. The night had grown deeper now, wrapping its dark arms around the little church like a soft blanket. Outside, the world was quiet, except for the occasional croak of distant frogs and the rustle of the wind through the trees. The air felt cool, almost sacred, as if heaven itself had paused to lean closer. Inside the church, the members sat quietly with eyes heavy, hearts softer than they had been in a long time. The truths of the night had already cut deep. Unforgiveness, lifestyle contradictions, disobedience, lack of preparation. Each revelation had peeled back layers people didn't know they had. And yet Pastor John wasn't finished. He stood by the pulpit now, his hands resting on the wood like a man holding the weight of something fragile and important. His face had taken on a deeper seriousness. His eyes had a softness that came from watching people heal and awaken right before him. Mama Esther sat close by, her hands clasped gently, her heartbeat steady but emotional. She felt lighter than she had felt in years. She wasn't fully healed, not yet, but she was opening. She was understanding. She was slowly coming back to life. Pastor John let the room breathe for a moment before he spoke again. My children, he began softly, I have one more truth to share tonight. This one is quiet, very quiet, but it delays more prayers than you think. Everyone sat up a little straighter. He continued, his voice low but firm. It is a mistake of impatience. A few people blinked confused. Others frowned slightly. as if trying to understand how something so small could be so dangerous. Pastor John stepped down from the pulpit and walked toward the center of the church. Many of you think you are waiting for heaven, but in truth, you are rushing heaven. He let the words sink in. You want answers quickly. You want results fast. You want miracles overnight. You want change immediately. And when the answer does not come at your expected time, you become tired. You become frustrated. You lose heart. You reduce your faith. You slow down your obedience. He paused. And slowly, silently, impatience kills your prayer. A man in the second row swallowed hard, lowering his gaze. Pastor John continued. Some of you give up one step before your breakthrough, one day before your miracle, one decision before your answer. He shook his head softly. You think heaven is late, but heaven is never late. Heaven is precise. He stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. Let me tell you a story. The congregation leaned forward. There was a young man named Chuka. He prayed for a job for months. He prayed with tears. He fasted. He sowed seeds. He believed. And finally, after many disappointments, an opportunity opened. A few people smiled weakly, but the job required patience. It required that he stay for 3 months under probation. It required him to be humble, consistent, and disciplined. Pastor John raised an eyebrow, and within 2 weeks he became frustrated. Members nodded knowingly. He said the salary was too small. He said the environment did not favor him. He said he was tired of struggling. And so he quit. A soft gasp rippled through the room. Do you know what happened? Pastor John paused, his voice softening. A week after he quit, the company began selecting staff on the probation list for permanent roles. Those who stayed received full positions, higher salary, and immediate opportunities. The room stilled, and Chuka missed it because he could not wait. A painful silence settled. Pastor John continued. Impatience stole his blessing, not the enemy. A woman wiped tears from her eyes. Pastor John looked around slowly. My children, impatience is not always loud. It does not always show itself. Sometimes it lives quietly in your heart. You pray for 1 week, and when nothing happens, your heart begins to grow tired. He gestured softly with his hand. You pray for 1 month, and when nothing shifts, your spirit grows weak. You pray for 1 year, and you begin to question whether heaven forgot your name. He looked toward the window, as if speaking to the night itself. But the Most High does not forget. The Creator does not abandon. Heaven does not ignore. He turned back to his people. But blessings come in their appointed time. He paused, letting the sacred truth spread. Appointed time is not your time. A man exhaled deeply, as if the words struck his chest. Pastor John continued. Do you know the mistake many Christians make? They think waiting is punishment. He shook his head gently. Waiting is not punishment. Waiting is preparation. Waiting is protection. Waiting is maturity. Waiting is alignment. He raised a finger softly. Sometimes heaven delays the answer to prepare you. Another finger. Sometimes heaven delays the answer to protect you from yourself. Another. Sometimes heaven delays the answer because the blessing is not ready. Another. And sometimes heaven delays the answer because you are not ready. The church was silent now, breathless, trembling, reflective. Pastor John walked toward Mama Esther. My daughter. She looked up at him, her throat tight. You prayed for 7 years. 7 years of tears. 7 years of waiting. 7 years of questions. And you thought heaven had abandoned you. Her eyes glistened. But today you see the truth. Heaven was not punishing you. Heaven was waiting for you to heal. Heaven was waiting for your heart to release bitterness. Heaven was waiting for your life to align. Heaven was waiting for obedience. Heaven was waiting for preparation. Her lips trembled as tears slid gently down her cheeks. And heaven was waiting for your patience. Pastor John gently wiped a tear from her face with a fatherly tenderness. You carried the pain for too long, yes, but you never stopped coming to this church. You never stopped showing up to prayer. You never stopped seeking. And that patience, even though heavy, even though slow, even though imperfect, kept your blessing alive. Mama Esther began sobbing quietly again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was cleansing. Pastor John stood and addressed the room again. My children, do you know what impatience does? It makes you abandon the process too soon. He lowered his voice. The seed you planted yesterday might begin to grow tomorrow, but impatience will make you leave the garden today. He let the words breathe. You prayed for a spouse, but you rushed into the wrong relationship because you couldn't wait. A woman covered her mouth, trembling. You prayed for financial breakthrough, but you rushed into a fake investment because you wanted quick results. A man nodded painfully. You prayed for healing, but you gave up on the process because you wanted instant relief. Several people whispered small prayers under their breath. Pastor John raised both hands slightly. Impatience is a silent killer of answered prayer. It does not shout. It whispers. He mimicked the whisper, lowering his voice dramatically. This thing is taking too long. Another whisper. Maybe the Creator has forgotten me. Another. Maybe I should try my own method. The congregation swallowed as one. And the moment you take matters into your own hands, you step out of position, you step out of alignment. You step away from the place where the blessing is meant to meet you. He sighed deeply. And many blessings have arrived at the right place, only to find the person no longer waiting there. A collective trembling filled the room. Pastor John's voice softened. My children, listen carefully. He placed a hand over his heart. When heaven is preparing something big, the waiting is always long. He paused. Not because heaven is slow, but because the blessing is heavy. A tear rolled down someone's cheek. You cannot rush a masterpiece. He looked around gently. Your waiting is not wasted. Your patience is not ignored. Every moment you endure, heaven sees it. Every tear you shed, heaven counts it. Every time you hold on when you want to give up, heaven honors it. He smiled faintly. And sometimes your breakthrough is waiting just behind the wall of your impatience. He placed his hand on the pulpit again. So I ask you tonight. His voice dropped to a whisper. How many blessings have you delayed because you could not wait? Silence consumed the room. The night outside had grown still, so still that even the crickets seemed to pause their singing. The church felt wrapped in a sacred hush, as if heaven itself had leaned down from the clouds to listen. The soft glow of the wall bulbs cast gentle shadows across the faces of the worshippers, and the air carried a peaceful heaviness, the kind that follows deep truth. Many hearts in the room were still trembling from the lesson of impatience. The weight of their own realizations hung over them like clouds ready to pour out cleansing rain. Mama Esther wiped her eyes again, her breath steady but emotional. She had never imagined she would see herself so clearly in one night. Pastor John stood quietly beside the pulpit for a long moment, his eyes lowered, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. He wasn't rushing. He understood the sacredness of what was happening in the room. When hearts begin to break open, healing must enter gently. Finally, he lifted his head. My children, he began softly, we have spoken about forgiveness. We have spoken about lifestyle. We have spoken about obedience. We have spoken about preparation. And we have spoken about patience. He paused. But now, we must speak about something even deeper, something that hides inside the heart and delays prayers quietly like a shadow that follows you everywhere. Everyone looked up slowly. Pastor John took a deep breath. Tonight, we speak about faith. A soft wave of murmurs rippled through the congregation. Pastor John lifted his hand gently. Many of you pray. Many of you cry. Many of you kneel. Many of you fast. But deep inside, you do not truly believe. A woman pressed her hand to her chest. Pastor John continued, you say, Creator, bless me. But in your mind you say, what if he doesn't? You say, heaven will make a way. But in your heart you say, I doubt it. You pray for healing, but you confess sickness. You pray for breakthrough, but you speak failure. He lowered his voice. You're asking with your mouth, but doubting with your heart. The room stilled, heavy with conviction. Pastor John stepped down from the pulpit. Let me tell you a story. The congregation leaned in. There was a woman. Her name was Lydia. She prayed for her business to grow. She prayed every morning. She prayed every night. She prayed in her shop. She prayed at home. He paused. But every time she finished praying, she said, "This country is hard. Nothing works here. People like me don't succeed." A few people exhaled sharply. She prayed for increase but confessed lack. She prayed for blessings but confessed impossibility. She prayed for favor but confessed defeat. Pastor John shook his head gently. "My children, listen very carefully. You cannot use prayer to build something and use your words to destroy it." The church gasped softly. Lydia did not delay her prayer because heaven was slow. She delayed it because her mouth canceled what her heart was begging for. He took another slow breath. Some of you have done the same. Heads hung low. You pray for long life, but say, "Death is near." You pray for peace, but say, "Everything is scattered." You pray for love, but say, "Good men no longer exist." You pray for opportunity, but say, "It will not work." You pray for children, but say, "Maybe it is over." You pray for help, but say, "There is no hope." He raised his voice slightly. "How can your prayer rise when your words pull it down?" Mama Esther blinked painfully. She remembered all the days she prayed for restoration and then whispered to herself, "Maybe my life is finished. Maybe nothing good will happen again." Her spirit trembled. Pastor John turned toward her. "My daughter," she looked up with wide, broken eyes. "You prayed for healing, but your confession every day was pain. You prayed for new beginnings, but your confession every day was hopelessness. You prayed for joy, but your confession every day was sorrow." Her chest tightened. "You prayed with your mouth, but your spirit whispered doubt." A tear slid down her cheek. Pastor John continued gently. "Doubt does not need to scream. It only needs to whisper." He looked around at the congregation. "And some of you are living with whispered doubt. It hides behind your smile. It hides behind your worship. It hides behind your amen. It hides behind your routine prayers." He took a slow step forward. "My children, heaven listens not only to your prayer, but also to your belief." He paused. The Most High does not answer fear. He does not answer worry. He does not answer anxiety disguised as prayer. He held his chest. He answers faith. The church breathed together, like one large body inhaling truth. "Let me show you something." He clasped his hands gently. "A seed is powerful, but it cannot grow unless it is planted in soil. In the same way, prayer is powerful, but it cannot grow unless it is planted in faith." A young man wiped his face. "When you pray but doubt, it is like planting a seed in air." Pastor John's voice deepened with emotion. "And some of you have been praying into the air." The room trembled with quiet sobs. Pastor John walked slowly toward the back of the church. There was a mother who prayed for a child to survive a sickness. She prayed with tears. But every time she prayed, she confessed fear. She said to friends, "I think my child will die." She said to neighbors, "The sickness is too strong." She said to herself, "Maybe this is the end." He paused. Her prayer was strong, but her doubt was stronger. A woman covered her face with her hands. The Most High is compassionate. He sees our fear. But when fear becomes stronger than faith, prayers become weak. He sighed softly. "My children, listen carefully. Faith does not mean you don't feel fear. It means you don't obey fear." A man whispered, "Creator, help me." Pastor John nodded. "Yes, because your heart needs divine strength to believe in what your eyes cannot see yet." He walked toward the pulpit again. "Do you know what unbelief does? It slows your blessing. It weakens your prayer. It dims your hope. It steals your expectation." He lifted his chin. "And expectation is the birthplace of miracles." Eyes widened. "You cannot receive what you do not expect." He looked upward, as if speaking to the heavens. "Faith is the bridge between your prayer and your answer." Then he lowered his gaze and said softly, "And some of you have been praying without building the bridge." The church fell into heavy silence. Pastor John turned toward Mama Esther again. My daughter, your faith was not dead, but it was tired. It was bruised. It was faint. Pain weakened it. Heartbreak shattered it. Loneliness drained it. She pressed her hands together. And when faith becomes faint, prayer becomes slow. She sobbed softly, understanding herself more clearly than she ever had. Pastor John knelt beside her gently. But tonight, your faith is waking up again. She lifted her eyes slowly. And when faith wakes up, prayers rise again. He rose and addressed the congregation with renewed strength. My children, listen to me. Faith is not shouting. Faith is not noise. Faith is trust. Faith is surrender. Faith is expectation. Faith is believing even when everything says give up. He pointed gently toward the people. Some of you stopped believing long before you stopped praying. The words hit the room like a heavy drum. You are kneeling, but your heart has given up. You are singing, but your spirit is tired. You are praying, but your faith is asleep. He softened his voice. Tonight, wake it up. He paused. Wake your faith. Wake your belief. Wake your expectation. Wake your hope. He placed his hand on the pulpit. Because without faith, prayer becomes empty. Pastor John looked around slowly. So I ask you tonight, his voice dropped to a gentle whisper. Do you truly believe the blessing you are praying for will come? Silence. Then he asked again, a little louder. Do you truly believe? A soft wave of sobs spread across the room. The night had stretched long over the little church. A night thick with truth, heavy with reflection, and overflow with the quiet ache of souls meeting themselves for the first time. Outside, the darkness was calm, like a sleeping child resting peacefully after a storm. The wind carried a coolness that whispered to the trees and slipped softly to the half-open windows. Inside the church, the atmosphere felt warm, warm with healing, warm with humility, warm with hearts unclenching layer by layer. Mama Esther sat with her hands folded gently on her lap, her eyes swollen from tears but glowing with something new, something soft and hopeful. It was not joy yet, but a beginning of it, a flicker, a seed. The other members sat in silent anticipation. They had walked through the night with Pastor John, through forgiveness, lifestyle, obedience, preparation, patience, and faith. Every revelation had touched a hidden place in their hearts. Every truth had peeled away layers they didn't even know they still carried. Now they waited. Surely there was more. Surely the journey wasn't finished yet. Pastor John stood quietly near the pulpit, his hands resting lightly against the wood. His shoulders looked more relaxed now, as if he had poured out everything inside him, like a father emptying his heart to his children, so they would not fall into the same traps he once did. He took a long breath, allowing the silence to stretch across the room. My children, he finally began, voice soft and steady, tonight has been heavy, tonight has been painful, but tonight has also been healing. A few people nodded slowly. We have looked into the heart. We have looked into the soul. We have looked into the mistakes many Christians make without knowing. He stepped closer to the congregation. And now, I want to show you something beautiful. He paused. Something that ties everything together. Pastor John turned his gaze toward Mama Esther. My daughter, tonight, your story changes. Her breath caught. Pastor John continued gently. For 7 years you have cried. For 7 years you have begged heaven for help. For 7 years you thought your pain was being ignored. Mama Esther trembled. But heaven did not ignore you. Heaven was waiting for you. A quiet gasp rose from the back of the church. Waiting for you to forgive. Waiting for you to soften. Waiting for you to obey. Waiting for you to prepare. Waiting for you to be patient. Waiting for your faith to wake up again. He took a slow step toward her. My daughter, tonight you have done what you could not do for 7 years. She lifted her eyes, tears shimmering like morning dew. Tonight, you open your heart. A sob slipped from her lips. Pastor John smiled warmly. And heaven has been waiting for this moment. The congregation exhaled softly. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Others nodded with trembling lips. The room felt full, not just of people, but of something invisible and sacred. Pastor John walked slowly across the front of the church. My children, let me tell you a truth many people never realize. Sometimes your breakthrough does not come when you shout, but when you soften. He continued, your miracle does not come when you cry louder, but when you surrender deeper. He paused. When you allow your heart to open, blessings begin to flow. He gestured gently toward Mama Esther. Tonight, a door in her heart is opened. He looked at the congregation, and that is where miracles begin. Mama Esther covered her face, overwhelmed. Pastor John continued, do you know what the Most High truly wants from you? A heart that is willing, a heart that is humble, a heart that is teachable, a heart that can receive. He placed one hand over his chest. Not a heart full of bitterness, not a heart full of doubt, not a heart full of fear, not a heart full of pride. He stepped forward gently. When your heart aligns with your prayer, heaven responds. A soft murmur of agreement swept the room. Pastor John walked toward the middle aisle. Some of you in this room tonight, your prayers have been waiting, not because of the devil, not because of circumstances, not because heaven forgot. He paused. Your prayers have been waiting because you are not ready. He looked around the room slowly. But tonight, readiness has begun. A man near the door wiped his face quietly. Pastor John continued, my children, hear me well. When a heart truly opens, miracles do not struggle to enter. Restoration does not delay. Healing does not fear. Breakthrough does not hide. He smiled softly. And Mama Esther's heart is opening tonight. Mama Esther let out a soft, trembling breath. Her hand shook gently as her tears fell. Tears not of despair, but of release. Pastor John walked to her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. My daughter, tonight, the Most High is not far from you. He is near. He has always been near. But now you can finally feel him again. She sobbed softly into her palms. Pastor John took a step back and addressed the church again. I want to show you something powerful, something many Christians forget. He raised his hand slightly. When you forgive, heaven moves. When you obey, heaven aligns. When you prepare, heaven releases. When you wait, heaven completes. When you believe, heaven answers. He paused. But when all these things come together, the blessing cannot be stopped. The church erupted in soft murmurs of agreement. Some of you tonight are on the edge of your breakthrough. Not next year, not next month. Tonight, a warm sense of hope filled the room. Some of you have been carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. Some of you have been delaying your own prayers with your fear, your doubt, your bitterness, your impatience. He smiled warmly. But tonight, your heart has changed. He spread his arms gently. And when the heart changes, everything else changes. He looked toward Mama Esther with soft eyes. My daughter, do you remember the prayer you prayed when you first came here 7 years ago? Her lips trembled. You cried out, Most High, remember me. Don't forget me. Please do something. She nodded painfully. Pastor John leaned closer. And tonight, heaven is saying, my daughter, I have remembered you. A wave of emotion rushed through the church. Someone cried loudly. Someone else whispered, Thank you, Most High. Another knelt quietly on the floor, overwhelmed. Mama Esther bent forward in her chair, her whole body trembling as she cried. Not from pain, but from healing. Pastor John placed a hand over her head. Tonight, something new begins for you. Her sobs grew softer, but deeper. Tonight, your story turns. She covered her face with both hands, shaking. Tonight, you are not leaving this place the way you came. The church was silent, reverent, full of awe. Pastor John slowly walked back to the pulpit, his voice now carrying the soft thunder of authority. My children, I want you to understand something deeply before we end tonight. He lifted his hand gently. The Most High answers prayers, but your life must agree with your prayer. He looked across the room. If your heart is closed, prayer cannot enter. If your mouth cancels your hope, prayer cannot settle. If your lifestyle contradicts your faith, prayer cannot grow. If your actions fight your desire, prayer cannot manifest. If you refuse to release the old, prayer cannot bring the new. He lowered his voice. But when the heart opens, prayer becomes a magnet for miracles. He smiled gently. And tonight, many hearts in this room have opened. The atmosphere shifted, warm, calm, holy. Pastor John lifted both hands. My children, now I want to bless you. The congregation bowed their heads, some kneeling, some sitting, all ready. Pastor John's voice trembled with compassion. May your heart never close again. May your bitterness melt into forgiveness. May your doubts dissolve into faith. May your impatience turn into trust. May your fear transform into courage. May your preparation align with your destiny. May your obedience lead you to miracles. May your lifestyle carry your blessing. May your tears water your testimony. May your breakthrough come in its perfect time. He paused. And may the Most High, who sees your heart, lift you into a new beginning. The church erupted in soft sobs, whispers, and trembling amens. Pastor John lowered his hand slowly. It is done. The room felt lighter, like chains falling, like burdens lifting, like dawn breaking after the longest night. Mama Esther lifted her head slowly, and for the first time in 7 years she smiled. A small smile, a gentle smile, a beginning smile. And everyone who saw it knew a miracle had begun. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Do you believe your breakthrough is coming? Answer yes if you believe.